The Bears Den with Drake Toll.
Welcome back into the Petty Clinic Low T Bears Den. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Baylor baseball game day right now. The Bears taking on Texas Tech. That game up at the top of the seventh. Baylor trailing 9-1 in Bricktown against the Red Raiders, the same team they took 2 of 3 from in Lubbock, Texas earlier this season. Joining us on the show now, Coach Mike Rooney. Mike, Baylor, I want to call you a Baylor baseball analyst because that's the angle we're taking today, but a national baseball analyst joining us to talk some Big 12 action. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, you got it, Drake. Happy to be here.
Well, yeah, I tell you what, baseball season in full swing. Like we were talking off the air, Baylor basketball has been the talk of the town for so long, and now we're getting right into the thick of things with baseball. And if there's one team that's on the bubble, D1Baseball.com, that's Baylor at 64th in the nation right now out of the 64 teams that are going to make it in. If one team's on the bubble, it's Baylor. And I'm sure you can attest, that makes games like today even more crucial.
Yeah, and obviously they're off to a tough start against Texas Tech, who is really, really good and really offensive. So, I think Steve Rodriguez right now and John Strauss, they have to start thinking about the rest of the tournament. And, I think going, first of all, being a bubble team, to your point, is not comfortable this time of year. And then you start getting upsets in conference tournaments, like East Carolina got upset yesterday. And, that bubble gets smaller and smaller. But I think for Baylor, going 0-2 in this tournament would really be problematic. So we'll see. It's not just what you do; it's what other teams do at times. But it's a shame because they're clearly Baylor's pretty injured right now, and just not a good time to be suffering some injuries.
Mike, looking at that, Baylor's ace Tyler Thomas will be out for the entirety of the tournament, and then Blake Helton, who's really been one of your Saturday guy this season in Big 12 play, likely will not play as well. How crucial is it to have a solid bullpen and even fresh starters coming into a tournament, especially where it's so key for Baylor to win a couple of these games?
Well, yeah, and I think it's for Baylor, a lot of times in these conference tournaments where you're just going to play so many games in a condensed schedule, Baylor's not necessarily built for that. Baylor's built to win weekends. It's a good position player group, but they're more built to win low scoring games. I think sometimes the Texas Techs of the world are at an advantage in a tournament like this where they can just kind of out offense people. So, and now you take Baylor's formula, which is pitching, defense, and team offense, and now you start to subtract you take any team in the country, you lose your Friday and your Saturday guy for a weekend. And, you're a bear on roller skates at this point, no pun intended. So, yeah, I think for Baylor, the injuries this weekend, they come into the weekend kind of teetering on the bubble, and to be without some of your key arms, it's certainly a huge challenge.
Mike, on top of that, you're looking at a Baylor team that's facing off against Big 12 opponents that seem to get hot at the right time. There was a stretch there where the Bears won 4 straight weekend series, and then you go into Oklahoma State and you fall in that, and you fall against Oklahoma, 2 teams that looked really good when they needed to look good to try to bolster their postseason resumes as well. Just the full scope of the Big 12 this season, what is your assessment of the conference as a whole?
Yeah, really, really good year for the Big 12. I think you've got 3 bona fide Omaha teams in Texas TCU and Texas Tech, and teams that could win the whole thing. And, I get it that Texas Tech they've suffered a ton of injuries, but if there's anybody that can withstand those injuries, it's the depth of Texas Tech. Texas and TCU, and TCU has struggled down the stretch, but those are still really elite teams. Oklahoma State's a very interesting team. I saw them earlier in the year. I think they are very much an Omaha caliber team, but they have suffered a bunch of injuries on the mound. There are rumors that Oklahoma State's getting healthier, so they become very viable. I think Oklahoma and Baylor are the next 2 clubs, and Kansas State was a team that people liked a lot in the preseason. They just never really got clicked in. They do have an ace in Jordan Wick. So I think the short answer to your question, Drake, is it's been a banner year for the Big 12. It's the number 2 RPI conference in the country, and I think that really clearly depicts how strong the league is.
Mike, when you're talking RPI, which is where we've been looking pretty heavily right now, because that's something the committee weighs a lot, as I know, in the postseason. You got Baylor, who will likely fall today to Texas Tech. Let's say they lose again tomorrow to TCU. When you're dropping a couple games to some top 5, top 10 caliber teams, how much of a swing does that have on your RPI? And is maybe that the best case scenario for Baylor if they're going to lose a couple in this tournament?
Well, I think, obviously going 0-2 in the tournament it's not a great situation for a couple reasons. One is the committee is in a room right now locked in watching games, right? And so you don't want, if I'm Baylor, I don't love the fact that they're seeing your team kind of get overwhelmed by Texas Tech. So that's not great. But I would say Texas Tech is the number 8 RPI in the country. So I don't think it's going to crush your RPI in that regard. I think for Baylor, winning tomorrow's game would be just critical, just to show a positive sign of life there. Because really what their resume is boiling down to right now, an RPI of 40 is very bubblish, but you do have a series win at Texas Tech. That is really loud. That is a really tough place to play. And you're in, you've got a chance to be the 5th place team in the number 2 league in the country. So I think those are 2 data points that are very helpful. An 0-2 performance in the tournament where you were already kind of bubble in, obviously that's, it's not going to make for a great night's sleep on Sunday night before the selection show.
Mike, when you get into these tournaments, and I know you've seen it kind of from the coaching ranks in a different way, this Baylor team, I know there are a lot of squads, a lot of groups across the country that are approaching their conference tournaments differently. I mean, you look at a team like Arkansas, they could go 0-2 in Hoover and still be likely the number 1 overall team in the country, whereas Baylor needs to pick up a win or 2 and maybe a few to help build their resume postseason-wise. If you are Steve Rodriguez and John Strauss, what is your emphasis that you put on this tournament, especially in comparison to teams that might be overlooking a field when they're trying to get ready for that big-time postseason play?
Well, I think it's a great question. I don't think any coach would want to go into a tournament and say, hey, we can't win this tournament. But I do think realistically, the chances of Baylor winning the Big 12 tournament, which is a very long tournament, by the way, it's a true regional with a championship game on Sunday. So, I mean, you're talking about having to win 3, 4, 5, or 6 games, depending on where you end up, if you end up in the loser's bracket. So I think for Baylor, without Thomas and without Helton, I don't know how, even with Thomas and Helton, I don't know how, for any team to win 5 or 6 games in a week is really challenging. But I do think today, you're kind of in a blowout game with Texas Tech, and I think they've done this. You really do save your key relievers for tomorrow because tomorrow becomes the most important game on the schedule. It's the only game that that you have. So I think the short answer to your question is tomorrow, you will see Baylor really air out the bullpen. Your best arms, you will go to your Luke Boyds. Those guys will pitch tomorrow because unless Baylor just blows out whoever they're going to end up playing, I think tomorrow becomes must win.
Mike, as you march through postseason play, we're looking at a lot of teams across the Big 12 that have those big bats, but then like Wicks at Kansas State, even Texas Tech has a few of those arms that throw really well. In the game of college baseball today, when you're looking down the barrel of a tournament like this, is it better to have a really strong batting lineup or a whole lot of arms that you're confident in down the stretch?
The answer is yes, Drake. No, just kidding. No, clearly you want both. And I think that's when you start thinking about Texas, that kind of is who Texas is. Texas has a little bit of both. But I would say if you made me pick one or the other, I would want an offense like Texas Tech. I do think there are times in a tournament like this where your offense can get so far out in front of people that you can really mask some issues on the pitching side. The other thing, and Baylor's in danger of this today, Texas Tech, might run rule Baylor. And so then, in theory, it saves pitching for both clubs. So, yeah, when you're playing this many games in a short period of time, especially at this time of the year when hitters are 200 at-bats in, your hitters, in theory, are really dialed in. I think a really potent offense can be a way that you can overwhelm a conference tournament.
Mike, you talked about some parity in baseball and even Eastern Carolina going down in their conference tournament. I'm looking at Baylor. You talked about the series in Lubbock. That's going to be where the Bears hang their hat when it comes to postseason resume, is taking that top 10 win in Lubbock, Texas, first team to do so since 2018. Then you get them in a game like today where you're down 9-1. You got the bases loaded and a shot to maybe make some noise here. But is that a surprise to you at all after taking a series on the road that Baylor has struggled so much in the opening game today?
Well, it's not a surprise to me because I think Texas Tech has just continued to play so well. And, I think for Texas Tech, there was the rumors that Tim Tadlock was the number one candidate at A&M. They lock him up to a lifetime contract. They announced a new building. So I think there's a lot of momentum at Texas Tech. I think ultimately the challenge for Texas Tech is, do the injuries catch up with them? There's several injuries on the mound. Dylan Noisey's out for the year. If Texas Tech is not a top 8 seed, can they win a super regional on the road? They've never played a super regional on the road. So I wouldn't say I'm surprised because I think so highly of Texas Tech. But I think for Baylor, I like this team, but I like it a lot better at full strength, and they're just not at full strength right now. And I'll tell you, the team, there's two categories of teams that Baylor has to look out for. Number one are teams on the outside, like your LSUs, your Georgias, your Long Beach States that are also bubble teams. But the thing that could really hurt Baylor is if Oklahoma makes some noise in this tournament, which they could easily do, and now you're the 6th place team, in theory, in the Big 12. And I think, right now your 2 resume points are 5th place team in the second best league in the country and a series win in Lubbock. Those are 2 really good bullet points. But if you lose one of them, that's a real problem.
Mike, looking postseason, say Baylor's able to do that. We talked about the RPI 40, right? That's as bubble as you can possibly bubble, and Baylor is on it. And I'm looking up and down these regionals and the possibility of where Baylor could go. I've seen a couple that say Starkville, looking at Arizona, going out to Stanford, maybe even Ole Miss. Best case scenario for a bubble team, do you want to be in that 8 or 9 regional so that your super regional, say you end up sneaking up on somebody in the regional, is a bit easier? Or do you want to be in that 12 to 13, 14 range where maybe your super regional is tougher, but your regional's not as daunting? Just from your perspective, looking postseason, best case scenario.
Yeah, I would say if I'm a bubble team, hey, you're just happy to get in. But I think, like, if you're talking about, kind of winning the surprise regional, I don't think the seed number matters as much as, hey, who's trending in what direction? I think that matters. I also think, like, hey, we could have some first-time hosts this year. Teams like Louisiana Tech and Charlotte. Hey, those are the places I'd want to go. Because very rarely do teams win a regional in their first year as a host. It's just such a new experience, kind of overwhelming for the players and the coaches. So I think my short answer would be that either a team that's trending down, but their resume was strong enough they ended up being a host anyway, or give me a first-time host where maybe the experience is a little overwhelming for that group.
So, Mike, moving forward into the postseason for Baylor, say they get healthy, and it looks like Tyler Thomas will be able to come back if Baylor's able to make it into the NCAA championship tournament or to a regional, and also Blake Helton. Say that you have that scenario for this squad. What is maybe the ceiling, best case scenario ceiling for this team to be able to make a possible, or just make noise in the postseason?
Well, I think Baylor, the best version of Baylor, there is no ceiling. Hey, it takes 5 games to get to Omaha. It's not that many, right? Like, you don't have to go on a 10-game winning streak to get to Omaha. Now, granted, winning those 5 games, it does feel like you got to win 55, right? Getting to Omaha is really difficult, and Baylor's going to have to do every bit of it on the road. But again, I'll go back to that resume bullet point. This is a team that went into Lubbock and beat Texas Tech. That just never happens. Like, that's not been done. Texas Tech is 4-0 in home super regionals. So I think Baylor, the best version of Baylor, is very capable. And I'll tell you the other thing I like about Baylor is these players and these coaches have been to regionals. This has become the standard under Steve Rodriguez. So they're not going to be spooked by the regional format or the kind of the anxiety of the postseason. So, if they can get in, I think they're very viable, assuming they're healthy. The best version. I mean, I'll take Tyler Thomas against anybody. That kid's a warrior. Jack Pineda is a great player. I've really come to enjoy him. And, Jared McKenzie, this is a potential first-team All-American down the road. So there's a lot to like about this team, but it's got to be the best version of them, and they got to get in first, and that's going to be their first, the initial challenge.
Well, Mike, last couple of questions for you here. I know I kept you a little bit long, but I love picking your brain on this Baylor team, especially with your knowledge of them. I mean, I'm looking down the stretch, and like you said, you got Luke Boyd, Tyler Thomas, Jared McKenzie, and a lot of these guys that have put together a season that folks weren't expecting. Preseason number 8 in the Big 12, and now on the cusp of making the postseason and finishing on the top half of the Big 12 conference, which has been so solid this year. For you, from a national perspective, when you think about Steve Rodriguez and his body of work at Baylor so far, what is your assessment of Coach Rod, the California guy that's taken Texas by storm?
Yeah, I think I love the job. I'm a big believer in Steve Rodriguez. I thought when Baylor hired him, I thought that was it was kind of out of nowhere. Didn't see it coming, but a slam dunk home run hire. There was big schools on the West Coast that had been eyeballing Steve Rodriguez. So for Baylor to be able to pull that off, I thought the 2019 team was an Omaha caliber team, and then just, injuries creep up. You lose a Cody Bradford for the year. I mean, that's a future big leaguer on the mound. So I don't think it's an if Steve Rodriguez is going to take a Baylor team to Omaha. I think it's a matter of just when. So, I think you guys have got the right guy. John Strauss is really good with the arms. I love the trend of the program. Just coming out of the 2019 team, that was a special team. That was a special group. It just didn't work out for that team for various reasons. But that's the name of the game in college baseball and other college sports, really, is you just keep building the momentum of your program. You keep building good rosters, and eventually one of those teams wins the 5 games you need to win to get to Omaha.
Well, Mike, I'd be remiss if I didn't flip our last question back around to you and ask, postseason baseball is coming up, the best time of the year. This whole next month is going to be nuts. And for you, I'm sure covering it as close as you can, where are you going to be? What's this next month look like for you?
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So I'm up in Bristol, Connecticut. I'm calling the Big 12 tournament from the mothership, from ESPN, and then I'll be here for the selection show on Monday, which will be really fun. And then I'll come back here for next weekend. The Bases Loaded, the Whip Around program, it's actually being rebranded. It's going to be called Squeeze Play this year. So we'll have the Squeeze Play Whip Around show regional weekend, which is super fun, maybe my favorite weekend of the entire year. And then, Super Regionals in Omaha, and here we go.
Man, gas it up. I know there are a lot of folks here, like I said, you still got that basketball hangover, but I'm a baseball guy, so finally we can get to the swing, pun intended, of things here in Waco. Mike, I got a question for you. We got our Bear Games question today that we ask all of our callers, anybody that calls, texts, our guests as well. So this one's a little bit convoluted today, but I want to get your thoughts here. We got some woodland creatures going in on this one. Like yesterday, I'll give you yesterday's for some warm-up, though. Baylor baseball is in a big league ballpark playing a 3-game weekend series. Where are you sending this team, and who are they playing against?
Okay, so I get to pick any big league ballpark.
Any one.
And then I need to pick which one, and I need to pick their opponent.
Bingo.
Okay. That's a really good question. I would say, well, okay, so Baylor's got a really cool California connection. So let's go Dodger Stadium, and let's play USC. They've got more national championships than anyone else in college baseball. So let's play the USC Trojans in Dodger Stadium.
Man, you're sending Coach Strauss and Coach Rod back home. I'm sure they won't complain about that whatsoever. Mike, I want to thank you for coming on the show today, joining us and talking Baylor baseball and college baseball. It's a pleasure to pick your brain and get your thoughts on this tournament moving forward. Maybe, baseball is a crazy sport. Maybe Baylor can make some noise.
You got it, Drake. My pleasure.
Thank you, Mike. Again, that's Mike Rooney, national baseball analyst, who'll be calling the Big 12 tournament this week, giving perspective on Baylor. Right now, 9